Oh, thank you. I'd have forgotten that. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's nice to see you here. Some familiar faces and some new faces. And I think, do we have one person on Zoom? Is that Ray? Two? Three? Well, okay. Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. So, I'm going to continue our series of talks on the Paramitas, or perfections in Buddhism. And just to name them, they are generosity, ethical conduct, patience, joyful effort, meditation, and wisdom. And I've appreciated the talks that have come before and some of the points that have been made. I liked that Tallis reminded us that generosity isn't just to be extended to other people in our relationships, but it's also for us. For example, if you find yourself having critical, judgmental thoughts about yourself, try to be a little bit generous about that. And I liked that Raisala reminded us that maybe the paramitas just boil down to loving kindness, which is a nice way to live if you can do that. And I liked Chris's example that practicing the paramitas is like learning a musical instrument. So practice over time makes a difference. And aside from listening to a couple of Dharma talks on the Paramitas, I used the same books that have already been mentioned. This one by Norman Fisher, The World Could Be Otherwise, Imagination and the Bodhisattva Path. And for those of you who don't know, Norman Fisher was the abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center and the founding teacher of Red Cedar Zen. And then the other book is by Dale Wright, who's a professor of Buddhist studies and also a practitioner, so he's not just an intellectual Buddhist. And this is The Six Perfections, Buddhism and the Cultivation of Character. And because many of the paramitas have already been discussed, the individual paramitas, and Ken did a nice job of showing us how practicing one paramita really often means practicing several at the same time. For example, generosity might take patience and wisdom and ethical conduct all at the same time. I'm going to call my talk just covering some odds and ends about the paramitas. I'm not going to focus on one in particular. And the first thing I want to say is just to emphasize that the paramitas also apply to us as individuals. They're not just to be used in relationships with other people. Your well-being and mine are not less than or more important than other people. So, generosity, patience, ethical conduct, those kinds of things should be applied in our own lives as well. And Norman Fisher talks about this in his book. When he was elected abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center, which is a difficult, complicated job, someone asked him, what is your priority? And here's what he said. This is a quote. My first priority is my own happiness. And, I think some people were a bit shocked about this. Doesn't that sound a little bit self-centered? But he pointed out that a crabby, unhappy abbot would have a big impact on the entire organization. And on the other hand, a happy, content abbot would make a real positive difference. And the same thing is true in our own lives. If your happiness or your unhappiness impacts every aspect of your life. It impacts your family life, it impacts your work life, it even impacts sort of your thinking. So he concluded on this topic, Norman concluded by saying, and here's another quote, we should all cultivate our own happiness, not for ourselves. True happiness can never be selfish in that way, but for others. So, you can be generous with yourself, and you can say, yes, I have time to establish a regular meditation practice, even when I'm busy. And if you do that, you can be patient with yourself. The important thing is to establish a regular practice, to sit down in a quiet place, to pay attention, to establish a stable posture, and then pay attention to your body and your breathing, and notice what arises, notice thoughts, notice feelings, memories, let them come and let them go. And when inevitably you're sidetracked, making a grocery list or thinking about something you're going to do later in the day, to kindly and gently remind yourself to come back to your body and breath. There's no need to evaluate, am I doing a good job? How's my practice doing compared to other people? All that's unnecessary. So just, be kind and generous with yourself when you establish a meditation practice. One of the things I like about Dale Wright's book is the emphasis on the creation of character over a lifetime, and consciously using the Paramitas as guidelines for that development. Because it seems to me, some of us do pay attention to character development and want to try to become a certain kind of person. And other people, either some of the time or often, just say and do whatever impulses they have and don't pay much attention to the outcome. But either way, your character will develop over your entire life. So, I guess we each get to decide whether we want to pay attention to that and try to direct it in some way or not. I'm not sure about this for myself, but one of the things I think has happened for me with a long meditation practice is now when I have the impulse to say or do something, there's usually what I would call a little space where I get to think about, do I want to say that? Do I want to do that? Is that a good idea or not? And I am really grateful for that space, because now I'm much less likely to say something I regret or do something I regret. And when I do because I do sometimes make mistakes, I'm more likely to see the results and realize, oh, that didn't turn out very well. I better do something about that. And as an example, a couple months ago, my wife got referred to physical therapy because she's having some balance issues, and the doctor thought it would be good for her to get some exercises to strengthen her legs and work on her balance. And I was glad for that referral. So she went to her first appointment, and when she got back, I asked her how did it go, and she said, "Oh, great! We worked on some exercises to reduce the pain in my shoulders." And she has a lot of arthritis in different places. So I was pissed. I didn't say anything, but what I thought was, God damn it! You're supposed to go there to work on your balance and strengthen your legs. But I realized, I better not say anything right now. And so I just thought about it. And then later in the day, I said, I'm worried about your balance. I don't want you to fall. When you go back to your physical therapist, would you ask for some exercises to address that? And she said, yeah, sure, and she did that. So I thought, that's good. I'm glad I held my tongue and I gave myself some time to think about it. So now I'm going to switch topics a little bit here. I think many of us are upset about and worried about the big problems in the world, and they seem to be getting worse. Violence, war, poverty, injustice, awful political climates in various countries, including our own, global warming, and wonder, what can I do? How can I live my life and make some kind of a difference? And one of the reasons I started practice in my mid-40s, my life was going really well, But I was worried. I started to worry about the three things the Buddha talked about, illness, old age, and death. Really, none of those things had affected me, but I knew, sooner or later, I'm going to have to deal with that stuff. And at the time, I thought, I have no tools for that. And my life, I'm doing well only because my life is going well, and I better, do something about this. And so that's why I started practice. But now I would add some of these other problems to the list, that list of three. There's lots to be worried about in the world. And how do we live our day-to-day lives and try to make some kind of a difference? I'm going to come back to that question in a minute, but I want to tell you a little story first, which is related to the question. When I first met my wife, she had a housemate, an 18-year-old woman who had just moved to town to go to Western. Name was Karen. And Karen had always wanted to be a veterinarian, even when she was, I think she was 8 or 9 when she first got that urge. So she went to Western, graduated, went to Washington State, got her degree in veterinary medicine, and then came back to Bellingham, started working at some veterinary clinics. But she also did other things. She started a spay-neuter clinic for low-income pet owners here in Whatcom County. And then she did the same thing in Mexico. And over the years, she's established a number of kind of animal care programs in this area. And she's made a real difference and contribution in her field. And I think her latest thing has been a website that has, various health concerns for different pets and what can be done about it. And I really respect and appreciate people like that, people that have a drive to do something, and they do it, and they make a difference in the world. And I think we all know, some of the big names in that area, like Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa. And then there are people like Karen that have a big impact in a smaller way. But I've often felt somewhat deficient in a way myself, because I've never had a drive to do that. And at this point in my life, I probably never will. And I've even talked with Norman Fisher a couple times about it, kind of like, what's wrong, or what do I need to do here? And he always said, both all the times I've talked to him about that, in a kind way, without any judgment, well, some people have that drive and some people don't. So to come back to the question, how do I make a difference in the world? How do I live my life? One of my favorite quotes from Suzuki Roshi, the short version is, "Shine one corner of the world." And the longer quote is, "We say, to shine one corner of the world, that is enough. Not the whole world. Just make it clear where you are." So to me, that means our day-to-day life. Each one of us, how you interact with your family, how you interact with people at work, when you're on the freeway driving in traffic, when you encounter a homeless person, when you're in a long line at the grocery store. And all of these are opportunities to shine your corner. And I think this is something that's possible for each one of us. I'm not going to make a big difference in the big problems of the world, but I can work on shining my corner of the world in my day-to-day life. And I think the Paramitas are a great set of guidelines to keep in mind. Another Suzuki Roshi quote that fits here is, "Accept what is as it is and help it to become its best." So that can be applied to each one of us as an individual, but also, if you're on the freeway in a traffic jam, what's the best way to go? Do you lay on your horn and pound the steering wheel and complain to the people in the car, or can you just, relax your body and take a few breaths and just, not make a difficult situation worse? Another advocate for this approach is Jetsunma Palmo. I don't know if any of you have heard of her. She's an English woman who went to India in the early 1960s by herself. She was a young woman, found a teacher in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and she's practiced intensely for over 60 years. And she said that changing the world starts with changing ourselves and bringing those changes into our day-to-day life. So, you know, the kinds of qualities that are mentioned in the Paramitas are really helpful, you know, to develop a heart that is generous, patient, you know, has ethical conduct, joyful effort. You know, the world could really use that from each one of us. So I have a lot of gratitude for the Paramitas because I feel like they're sort of giving me a guideline to follow. And I also like to look in my day-to-day life, I like to look for examples of, you know, see somebody handling a challenging situation really well, or even seeing someone who's not handling it well, because either one of those things inspires me to sort of keep going. I don't want to be a bad example. I want to be a good example. And it turns out that airports are really good places to watch people. There's a lot going on there. So I think I'll tell you a couple stories about what we've noticed in airports in the last couple years. So a few years ago, we were going on a family trip to meet our daughter in Ohio, and so we always fly out of Bellingham because it's so much easier than driving to SeaTac, and our little toy airport has a much better system to go through. So we caught an early flight to Seattle. We get off the plane, go up to our gate, and oh, your flight's been canceled. So you know, we had I think we had about an hour's note. The flight was going to leave in about an hour, canceled. And so for us and, you know, a couple hundred other people, this is not good news. And so everybody's rushing to the counter to get a new flight. And we were back in line quite a ways. And I thought to myself, you know, I would hate to be one of those ticket agents behind the counter. They got, you know, 200 people that are not happy, and they got to find flights for all these people. But there was one guy behind the counter who was just amazing. He was patient. He maintained a sense of humor. He never got rattled. I mean, he had person after person coming up to him, some of them pretty stressed and pretty unhappy, but he never lost his equanimity. It was very impressive. I thought, wow, you know, that guy's really earning his money today. And then another thing that happened in the airport on another trip. Let me just get to my notes here. We were coming back from a trip, and so we landed at SeaTac in the evening, and we were waiting to catch a flight to Bellingham. And so we get to the gate, and the flight's delayed, and then it's delayed again and delayed again. And so we have, you know, 50 or 60 people milling around the gate, wondering, you know, when's this thing going to take off? It's pretty late in the evening. And I noticed a young woman with two little kids. They were probably 6 and 8, and they were very active, you know, wrestling each other and running around. And she was doing a super job of what I would call warmly containing them. She was letting them do stuff, but, you know, making sure they weren't going to get in other people's way or bother. And she never lost her patience. And you know, I thought, wow, she's probably been traveling for a good chunk of the day by herself with two little kids who are, you know, how little boys can really rev it up and really be active. And she was just remarkable. And at the same time, there was a guy, you know, I don't know, in his 50s or 60s who was really pissed. And he was pacing around and muttering and, you know, God damn it, I'm never going to fly this airline again. When is this thing going to go off? And just, you know, in a way, he was putting into words what many people were thinking and feeling, myself included. You know, I was having many of the same thoughts. But I thought to myself, wow, you know, I am so glad that I can sit here and just I'm aware that I'm upset, I'm having some of this, I'm impatient, I'm but I can just be quiet about it. I can let the thoughts and feelings come and go. And I actually was kind of grateful to this guy because he was showing me that, I could do that too, but, but I'm really glad that I'm not. So I think I did a lot of meditation. I actually do a lot of meditation when I'm waiting at the airport. But yeah, I was really glad to be able to just notice my upset and not act on it. So I would like to encourage you to keep the paramitas in mind as you go through your day-to-day life. They can be very helpful. And the Buddha talked about not accepting his teachings just on faith or because you give the Buddha some kind of authority, but to try his teachings in your day-to-day life and see if they reduce suffering in you and in other people. And life will give you an endless number of opportunities to test whether the paramitas are helpful. So the stage is set. And I'm going to finish with a little, I guess I'd call it a quote. I'm not sure it's a poem, but it's from Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she's a Native American writer and activist. One of her books is called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's a wonderful book about ecology and Native American culture and tradition. So here are some of her words. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of joy and wonder. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. So I'll just say that one more time. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of joy and wonder. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. So, thank you very much for listening, and that's what I have to